podcast because it's how many titles can we get Michael to say before he messes up and screws up something? So just at the beginning, we'll do the honorific titles, but it really is an honor to have our guest on for this special episode. We're going to learn why he retired and became a substitute teacher as we welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, worshipful brother Greg Knott, who's a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, brother.
Michael, great to be with you. Like you say, those titles, they're important part of the craft, but that's enough of them.
Okay, deal. I love brother too, but you have such an illustrious background. Past master, Shriner. You're an Illinois and a DC Freemason, Naval Lodge. Love that.
Yep.
We mentioned the 33rd degree Scottish Rite, but there's one accomplishment that you have listed on your resume that it always makes me smile when I hear it, and that's Eagle Scout. Take us back to the days of scouting and how that kind of crafted your life to become a Freemason.
Well, there's a direct correlation. I was in scouting as a Cub Scout, came up into Boy Scouts. As you say, I earned the Eagle Scout, and I'm probably more proud of it today than I was then because I think with time you appreciate more. But as I looked back, all of those experiences in scouting directly shaped who I am today. And the correlation between Freemasonry and scouting, there's so much, you could do entire episodes, but the value system is very much the same. And it's funny, I really wasn't in scouts. I aged out as a youth, and then my own son, he joined Cub Scouts, and so I came through with him in the last few years, and he is also an Eagle Scout, and earned that about 3 years ago. And he aged out, but I stuck around, so I'm
Hmm.
still involved to this day, and I'm on the council board, which is the governing board for our area. So it's just I so believe in the movement of scouting that I don't see me ever not being involved in it. And when I look at it and Freemasonry, there's just uh, that's it's actually why I became a Freemason in a sense because I missed a lot of those things that we did in scouting, and so I took that opportunity, and I didn't realize fully how close similar they are, but once I came through the degrees, and it's just the value systems are almost identical. And it's scouting is similar to Freemasonry in that there's so many things you can learn. It's how you apply yourself, and you create your own path in a sense. And that's those value systems I think are more needed now than ever. So
Oh,
anyway, still
absolutely.
I'm very proud to be an Eagle Scout.
I wish that I had stuck with scouting. I think I did it for like one weekend. And when I was growing up, scouting was for camping, very outdoors
Yeah.
people, which I am not one of. And that continues
Okay.
to this day, where, for me,
Well.
roughing it is, the fourth floor of the Hilton.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you talk about all of the other things with scouting, the kind of the introduction to like what it means to be a brother, a friend,
Yeah.
to be a trusted member in society, to think about your community first, to have a love for country. Yeah, those things are ingrained in Freemasonry. Some of them we do talk about, but it all starts there. The seed for it is
Yeah.
in the scouts.
The seed is there, and if you think about, at least in scouting especially, we talk about this, is character development. Is that especially when you're a youth, there's so many things you can be influenced by, and we hope that scouting does a positive influence. I've seen it firsthand. The kids who were in my den, my tiger den, which is the beginning for Cub Scouts, today they've all a lot of them graduate in college now, and
Hmm.
they're engineers, and they're in the trades, but they're still all upstanding, great kids. They're now adults, and I see that influence, and I see the same thing in the craft. There's a lot of men. Sometimes when you knock on that door, you're not exactly sure why, but you just over time you learn more, you apply it more, you have positive influences of the multi generations and things, of course. And I think we're also a character development organization.
Mm. Now, you are one of the brothers who I feel like I've known for some time. We've never met in person. I think this is the extent with computer screens and technology today.
Right.
I hear your voice with the podcast, the Meet, Act, and Part with Brother Darren.
Hmm.
Um, I've always wondered, and we were talking about a dear friend of ours, Brother RJ, how you're able to do all of the things that you do in Freemasonry and still be able to do things like scouting and be involved in the community?
I've always been very calendar oriented, and so even in my career, I really didn't like anybody else controlling my calendar because that meant I could do more things if I was controlling, to a reasonable degree to do it. And so I've been always one of those. I even look back to my scouting career. I was the same. I knew how long it took to get from, say, one rank to another and what I needed to do in there. And I planned it accordingly. And in many ways, my career reflected those same kind of skills. And so I was a good multitasker. You could also maybe attribute it to I have so many interests to keep my boredom level in check, and so I think that's part of it. And it's just, I know limits though within things as well. You know, I don't aspire to be in grand lines or any of those. I've not done any of that because for me, I'd rather do it locally, and then that means I can have actually I think more of an impact locally than you can in other things. Other people excel at that, but I've just done most of the stuff I've done in Freemasonry scouting. I've even been an elected official for 30 years. It's just all local stuff I've done.
Yeah, you've got a really interesting background, and we're going to get to it on this episode. I know the episode title says "Why I Retired and Became a Substitute Teacher," and we'll get to that. Trust
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
But I feel like you could also be kind of the Scottish Rite, not just a man, a Mason, and going back to Scouts and that calling for public service and helping other people. Is that what kind of planted the seeds again back when you were young to get into education and teaching?
No question. Public service has been a hobby, an aspiration, something I've spent thousands of hours on. And it's just I think when I grew up, my most of my role models were World War II, the greatest generation folks, men and women, both. And especially my relatives, I saw them serve on, including my dad, though he was the next generation, but library boards and village boards and townships and forest preserve boards and all that. And I just thought that's just what you did. And I've always had an interest in politics, but I've really had way more interest in public service. Sometimes you have to do one to get to the other,
Mm,
but I just saw it as a sense of duty. And when I look at the craft, I see all the things that we can learn in a lodge room, but to me, if we don't take those out and externally apply them in whatever way that find is you can do it in the community, I think it's a lost opportunity. You know, and because like I said, the scouting values, the Freemason values, they're both the same. They're about character development, and we talk a lot about citizenship in scouting, and there's no question that had a huge impact on me. One of the things you do as an Eagle Scout is an Eagle Scout project, and so my project, which is really the capstone of your youth scouting career, was I planned and we created this marker, which was a tribute to Abraham Lincoln on a trail in a state park here in Illinois, and it was fascinating to learn about his history. He had a local connection in my area here in Illinois, and I think just all of those things, just my fire never died, and
mm.
I'm still involved today on boards and things, and I just think it's a sense that you can help the community and you can accomplish something. Again, at the local level, uh, I'm on a forest preserve board now. So we have several properties in our county, and I can see tangibly the work we do as a board, helps the environment, helps the public. They get out and they recreate in our public spaces and all that kind of stuff. And I guess if I had a wish, I wish more people would be involved and do it. That would be,
Mm.
I know not everybody's wired like I am, but there's so many places you can contribute in public service. Doesn't have to be on a governing board, um, because our communities need you, which is a whole discussion we could have. But it's just always motivated me.
Yeah, yeah. So I've known you from our days back with the Midnight Freemasons. That was before the COVID pandemic. I'm like, wow, finally somebody that I knew before COVID. um, I also know you as one of my Midwest brothers, as you mentioned, Illinois. And it's interesting in the craft, you meet these men and you're like, oh, cool. We are like minded. We have a lot we call a public service, for example, involved with our community, involved with our lodge. We love this craft. And then you start connecting with them outside and in a personal level. And I'm on LinkedIn. I was like, wow, he's works for the University of Illinois. He's, really involved there. So tell us a little bit about your time in higher ed before we get to why you left it to become a public school teacher.
So you've heard the term military brat, you know.
Mm,
I think I was a higher ed brat in a sense. So I grew up only ten miles from the University of Illinois. My mom and dad worked there. My grandfather attended there. My great grandfather attended there. And there's just always been all these family connections. And so I think it was natural that I had this interest in education. And so I was drawn to higher education and worked there in numerous capacities. I mean, I worked on the grounds crew. I worked on the farm, worked in the retirement system part of it. And it's like and it was an amazing career because each step I got to do more and more things. And I traveled overseas, went to China, helped recruit students, started a couple new entities within the university. And I capped it out with I was secretary for the board of trustees for the University of Illinois system, which is we have three campuses: Springfield, Chicago, and Urbana. Urbana's the Big Ten university, but it was just again, I was always fascinated with learning. I think that was the key. That's always kept me going. I got to guest lecture. I was not a faculty member. I was always an administrator, but I was a budget expert and an HR expert, and so I spent a lot of opportunities to talk to classes about those kinds of things, and the variety of things you can do in higher ed, especially a Big Ten, size of institution, is almost unlimited. And
mm,
it's funny, you can go from one job, one career to the other, but you're still all within the same, family, so to speak. And I just the people I got to work with just PhD, some of the smartest people in the world. And one of my units that I worked in, food science and human nutrition, we ran a cafe. And so every day I would eat lunch in this cafe. And the conversations you could have with just anybody from the university president to the youngest faculty member to a graduate student to an undergrad, and hearing what their stories were and what they were trying to accomplish or had already impacted in many cases. To me, that was exciting. And
mm,
so I spent 35 years in all those roles. And COVID, it's funny, my last role as secretary of the university, I took it on a while before COVID. And so I had to, as many people, I managed COVID. And so my job was to manage the board of trustees. So I arranged the meeting, I went through the agendas with them, I duly reported to the university president and to the board chair. It's interesting with trustees, they're volunteers. They're appointed by the governor in our state, but they're volunteers. They're not paid. So, in one case, I work with literally a rocket scientist. President Killeen is a rocket scientist, great guy. But I also work for a volunteer, Chairman Edwards. But so you learn to balance those things. I would find things that I learned in the craft and in scouting applied directly to what I was doing in higher ed. Again,
hmm.
I would literally in each of my offices there's 12 points of the scout law, and I would just print those out, and I would have those either on my bulletin board or on my desk, because to me they were like guideposts of how I could navigate the system. And so anyway, higher ed was just an exciting career, and I was so lucky in all the things I got to do. And but there comes a time when it's time to change. And I had done, I couldn't go any higher. I was one of the university officers. I would tell somebody, if you want to know what my job is, I said, if you ever look at your diploma, I said, do you know those signatures on the bottom of them? Yeah, I was one of those guys. So, so
Nice.
my name's on thousands of diplomas. So,
Your
but I'll tell
autograph.
you, yeah, my autograph. So my I'll cap the story off a little bit with one personal story. My daughter, she uh she graduated high school, went to our local community college, and I was on the board of that community college and I was chairman. And so I got to sign her diploma as chair. She transferred to the University of Illinois, got her undergraduate degree, and I got to sign her diploma. She
That's awesome.
stayed, got her graduate degree, and I signed that diploma. So dad got to sign three college diplomas for his daughter, and
Mm.
that's I don't know that very many people ever get to do that.
Most
But
of us just get to pay for them. We don't get to sign them.
yeah,
So that's
that's right. I was still paying on all that. Don't get me
yeah.
wrong, but the ability to sign. But through COVID, like many people, you it was like an awakening in some ways. I think for many. And when I got to that 35-year mark, that was about you max out and from a pension standpoint and stuff. And I just thought there's still other things I want to go do. So gave a year's notice. I trained my successor, made sure there was a huge, strong succession plan. We worked together, and I just kind of faded away. And my successor took over. And so since then, I've been on to other things.
And let's get to that because this is the coolest thing. It was a few months ago. I was on my lunch break. I'm scrolling through my phone on LinkedIn and I see this post from Greg Knott and he's talking about, and it was this rather lengthy post. I opened it up and I'm reading all of this. And one of the quotes that stuck to me, it just jumped out. It said, I left working the 40-hour plus week job and retired about 18 months ago and became a substitute teacher for St. Joseph Ogden High School in Illinois. What compelled you to do that after 35 years, as you said, at the University of Illinois, to go back to the classroom?
Well, so I attended St. Joe Ogden. We're a very small rural school in East Central Illinois, about 450 high school students. And when I was in high school, I always wanted to be a high school teacher, a history teacher.
Mm.
And just for whatever reason, I got onto other things in my career, and so that that always kind of was still there in my mind. And as I was winding down those 35 years, I was like, well, what in the world am I going to do? It's you listed off all the stuff I'm involved masonically, but I'm like, what about the daytime? I got to have something to do there that day. And it just clicked one day. I was like, well, what am I thinking? I I think I'd read somewhere about the need for substitute teachers, and I contacted our school district, and they're like, "Yeah, we'd love to have you." So in Illinois, you need a 4-year degree, you get a teaching sub license, and so they have me. So I retired on an April 30, and by May 2nd of 23, I had already substitute taught.
Hmm.
So because I told them I wanted to see if it was for me. And it was funny. It was just like, in some ways, I felt like I'd never left. And then I remembered all those positive influences those teachers had on me that directly correlated to the success I had. And I'm like, maybe there's a little bit I can do to still help my home school district and to become a sub. So it was just that long-term desire and love of education, I think, was my core motivation.
Oh yeah, I mean, all that experience from higher ed in the admin side, getting to bring that to the school district, and maybe the listener heard, "Oh, school teacher, he teaches history." No, he's a substitute, and I think about it this way: like, I remember when I was a kid, especially in high school, the hell that we would put
Oh
substitute
yeah,
teachers. Like, if we knew we had a substitute teacher, that's like a free day in class. Like, we weren't doing anything.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I'm not
has
sure
that
that my
changed?
no, no, no. It's just I think that I spent a big chunk of my career always had an HR role, and so
Mm,
in that aspect, you learn a lot about people. And probably the other thing was I can't imagine they could do anything that we didn't do maybe 40 years ago. And if we could talk about change in a minute here, but no, I just came in, and I told the school, I said, it was at the end of a school year, I said, let me do a couple days, make sure this is for me. And I was like, well, it's fine. We've got a good school district. And, the key is like, like any meeting, there has to be an agenda, in this case, a lesson plan, and you have to execute it. And as long as you
mm.
keep control of the classroom and things like that, and I'm not afraid to speak up, it goes well. And so I've had an extremely positive experience. I'm now in my third parts of my third school year of doing it.
Awesome. So take me through an average day. Like you have a set schedule. I'm guessing it's, 3 days a week or 4 days or however many. And then what, you get a phone call in the morning that says, be at this school and you're teaching this today. Is it
Yeah,
just that simple?
it is, and so two things. There's some they'll know some teachers are going to be gone in advance. Like for example, I help cover the agriculture classes, so they do a lot of things with FFA, which is the youth
Mm-hmm.
group for, and so they know that the teacher knows she's going to be gone to contests, and so those will be known, they'll be scheduled. Then of course there's the other days, like you say, it's like, hey, somebody called in sick today, can you come cover? So the full time teacher's responsibility is to leave a lesson plan for the sub, and so they do, I always get there early because I want to make sure technology works. I want to make sure, I read through the lesson plan, and, I've done it so many times now. The kids, they know me, even though
Mm.
I float around, different topics. But, some days it may be as simple as we're showing the movie. Other days we're engaged. We had a couple days we were doing parliamentary procedure with the FFA kids. And so, well, gee, that's no different running a Masonic meeting, right? You
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
And so anyway, you can bring a lot of that there. And I think the one of the things I like doing is I engage the kids. I ask them questions. A lot of them I know their parents, but I'm curious about what do they think?
Mm.
What are you learning? And there's some, they're struggling. They probably don't want to be there in particular, but I try to get them to open up a little bit, in that short period of time I have with them. And and I said I've offered sometimes, I'm like, look, if you want to know things about college, let me know, because I said I've got a little bit of a background or more in it. But I think,
Yeah.
and the key is with
So
anything is
I
to
guess that's
talk
my
to
other
them.
question is, yeah, the reception that you get from them, because I mean, while you're talking, I'm thinking my son is a senior in high school. He'll graduate this May. There's the few times that I walk into that school, and I'm like, wow, it's like walking into a time machine. I didn't go to that school, but they all kind of have this like. Still, they look the same from like the '80s movies that we might remember.
Right.
Um, but I have found the kids are different, and I'm like, well, maybe it's because I'm getting older and they're afraid to talk to me. But what are those conversations like with young people these days?
Well, you hit it right on the head. Kids, uh, it is different. As much as it is the same, it's still different. Um, one of the reasons I want to engage them is because I believe verbal communication is so important. Now, we spend so much time on devices and things, and that was one of the early things I noticed of what was the difference. I literally graduated 40 years ago. So what
Mm,
is that? I mean, classrooms are pretty much the same. We've had a couple new additions, and it still feels the same to me. School day is pretty similar, but the learning environment is different. The kids' environment is different. Their home environment is different. A lot of that has been influenced by technology. And so, schools in across the country today, most of them have a no cell phone policy. Now, that can vary in enforcement from, hey, just keep it in your pocket, to you can't even bring it in the building. And so,
mm,
in our case, the kids have them. It's a constant, case of me reminding them to put them away, which, that's just part of it. But what I get concerned about is, and I'm just as guilty, I'm including myself. We spend so much time. I get concerned about the ability to interact with each other. Now, that's not saying they don't, because they do, and they're giggling in the hallways, and all that's the same. But a lot of their communication, because they're texting, because a lot of times we get done early, I'm like, okay, you can get your cell phones out, and
mm,
it's like a race to open up whatever app they're using, or texting, but that's how they're communicating. And I see the learning style is different. It's funny. One of the first times I went into a classroom, and I had been in this classroom as a student, I'm like, oh well, the chalkboard's now a whiteboard. That's good. Well, they don't use a whiteboard anymore because there's a big TV monitor in front of it, because everything's online now. You know,
mm,
students today, at least, what from what I'm familiar with, their lesson plans may be on Google Classroom. So we come in, we open that up, and I'm telling them to put away their phone, and the next sentence out of my mouth is, get your Chromebook out. So,
mm.
you know, so that's why I try to engage them, and the teachers do too. So don't I don't want to say that that's all they do, but I've just noticed, and it's not worse. It's just different than 40 years ago. But what I get concerned about is that ability to one interact with each other, on an interpersonal basis. That I can send you an emoji on a text of a smile or a frown, but it's different than when I can see your eyes and read your personal action or reaction to our conversation, and then just all the other negative online things that you read about in society. But that's one of the biggest things, and I think over time, educators have had to learn how to use technology too. Not just how to open up the device, but their teaching style is different. It has to be, and in many ways, the students can benefit from the technology. All the information in the world is there,
Mm,
and I saw this quote the other day that really hit home with me. It's like we're training them how to go look up the information. It's limitless, right?
mhm,
Google, Chat GPT, or whatever you use. But do they know how to use it? One of my degrees I got was in library and information science. So I knew how to research, or I do know how to research, and then I know how to apply it. And
mhm.
it's so easy today to look up something. Okay, one of my funniest examples is we were doing a feed ration for an animal science project in my ag class. I thought, oh yeah, I've done these. Well, yeah, 40 years ago. Well, they couldn't use Google, but I could. I opened up Chat GPT in this case, asked how to do the equation, popped it out, and we worked through the worksheet. That didn't tell me how to do it though. I just, I still don't. I guess my point is learning is there. I worry about fundamentals. I worry about the stress and the anxiety, especially that come from devices. When I talk to school administrators, when I talk to our school teachers, they see the stress in the kids. I see the stress in the kids. The anxiety levels today, I don't have a way to measure it from 40 years ago, but my perception is they're much higher. uh,
Mm.
you know, kids, it's just that I think the pressure they're also under to perform. For us, it's like, hope you graduate, and if you don't, we'll
Pretty
probably
much,
pass
yeah.
you. We'll pass you along, right? Well,
Yeah.
today, the state and the public is demanding, accountability more in the schools, and that's a whole topic itself. But all of that pressure and anxiety is both on the students and on the teachers. It's more so, and I think it's more intense than it was in my era.
Mhm. So I want to talk about this because I see this with my son as well. And I'm like, wow, how fortunate you are to live in an era where if you ever had a question for anything, you can just open up this little device in your pocket and instantly know. Like you, as you were saying, you can know anything. But there's massive things that he doesn't have that I did when I was his age. And one of them are like these, they call them soft skills now, the personal interaction skills. And it's really interesting to watch him, I feel like, sometimes struggle to interact with other adults or even kids that he doesn't know, in unfamiliar settings because again they're just kind of not used to being in that world where that was all we did growing up in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we have, the set of encyclopedias that may have been out in the hallway that you run out to reference, that was our internet. But
Hmm.
yeah, so we had no choice but to interact. I know what I see teachers doing today, though, is they're trying to do group projects all the time within the classroom to get the students to interact. They're still using the computer, and that's fine. And there's a concerted effort to make sure they're engaging with each other, more and more. Um, but that's only at school. The kids that go home and can immediately get on the devices, and it's the collective of all that that's the anxiety. You know, things when I was at the university, one thing I always stressed was networking with other people, and that requires that personal interaction skill that you mentioned.
I want to talk about the conversations. I'm wondering what it's like from what you discuss in the teachers lounge to the lodge parking lot conversations that you may have. Do any of those cross over?
They do. One good example I had was I was in I think a history class or social studies, whatever. We're talking about town history, but somehow one of the students asked me, goes, essentially his question was, what was it like with growing up without technology? And
Mm.
it's it's like he knew he was missing out on something, you know, and whatever that was, the personal interactions and all that. So they're very cognizant of what, in a sense, they've had to give up in terms of those, different kind of relationships than we had in the 80s and 90s until today. And so, yeah, that's, that's a parking lot kind of style conversation. And, that was like off the whatever the lesson plan was that day. But I thought it was so insightful that the student or two they recognized it. And then when we talked about it with others in there, I could see the head shaking. They didn't say much, but I could see they knew they didn't know what it was they were missing, exactly. But like that, how their parents grew up versus how they grew up, but they knew it was different.
Mm. I've thought a lot about it in life. I've wanted to go back and become an adjunct professor at one of the community colleges in my area. Hasn't happened yet. I keep applying, but they want this thing called experience. It's like trying to get credit. How do you get teaching credit without getting a chance to teach? It can be a little frustrating. But the idea of being a substitute teacher in as a retirement career, I think about that as well in the mornings when I see the school bus go down the street, and it's usually driven by a retired gentleman who's this is his thing. He brings the kids safely to school every day. I don't think a lot of folks think about that as an option, either one as a part-time job that they can do, or two as a part-time job but also as a full-time way to give back to the community. So what advice would you give, or what words do you have to share to someone listening to this episode that's thinking, I never thought about this?
I think one, if you have an interest in young people, if you have an interest in education, every school needs substitutes. And what you contribute by relieving the teacher of their duty for that day to maybe go on that field trip or whatever, you're directly contributing to the success of those students. And to me, that's the whole motivating factor. It's such an easy way to give back. It's not for everybody, but I think if you have, any desire to see what's going on in a classroom today with all the criticism of public schools, you'll be surprised that it's way different than probably what you're hearing on social media and other places. And it's a wonderful way to give back to the young people because we're helping shape them like other people help shape you. And if it's not for you, you can try it for a while and leave. That's the beauty of it. It's very flexible and the pay's okay. Um, but it's the joy of walking through a University of Illinois football game tailgate, hearing my name across the parking lot, and it was one of the kids I've got in the classroom.
That's
It's
awesome.
it's connecting with them.
That's very cool. Well, brother, it's so good to see and hear your voice again. I'm happy to hear the Meet at and Park podcast is fired back up again. I know you guys are going to have a busy season. So thank you so much for taking some time out, Brother Greg, and joining us on the Craftsman Online podcast.
Michael, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Perfect.
All
Ta
right.
da! That was good.
Yeah, yeah, that was fun. Boy, the time flies, doesn't it, when you're doing these? So
Oh, yeah, it was. I mean, and I'm just sitting here going, I'm gonna have this is a very light edit. It's just a couple things I'm gonna have to clean. You're a great speaker. Did a great job.
well, thank you. Well, it was fun talking about it. Everybody, we didn't really get, most people told me I was crazy for going to be a sub.